Cleveland is standing on the edge of something right now, and most fans don't even realize how close this franchise is to either getting it right or completely ruining everything all over again. Because what's happening isn't just another late-season roster move, and it's definitely not some meaningless transaction no one will remember in a week. This is one of those moments that quietly tells you the people in charge are finally feeling the heat. And if you've spent Sundays yelling at your screen watching your quarterback scramble for his life while defenders walk into the backfield untouched, then you already know this was coming. For months, the conversation has been loud, emotional, and completely predictable. Everyone arguing about quarterback play, everyone debating whether the guy under center is the answer or another mistake. But almost nobody wanted to admit the uncomfortable truth sitting right in front of them every single snap. You can't judge a quarterback who has no time. You can't build an offense when protection collapses in under 2 seconds. And you definitely can't develop a young passer when every dropback feels like a survival drill instead of a football play. Now, with the season basically finished and nothing left to save, Cleveland finally made a move that says a lot more than it appears to on the surface. A move that suggests patience inside the building is officially gone, that excuses are wearing thin, that someone at the top is tired of watching this offense self-destruct the same way week after week. On paper, it looks small, easy to overlook, but timing matters in this league, and this timing speaks volumes. Because this isn't just about one lineman, it's about accountability, it's about urgency, and it's about whether Cleveland has finally realized that everything they want to become starts in the trenches or nowhere at all. And once you see what triggered this decision, who it affects, and what it could lead to next, it becomes impossible to look at the future of this franchise the same way again. The truth is, the breaking point didn't come suddenly. It's been building week after week, hit after hit, snap after snap. You could see it in the way drives kept stalling before they even had a chance to breathe. You could hear it in the frustration pouring out of the fan base, the analysts, and even the players trying to stay politically correct in interviews. What's happening inside the Cleveland Browns organization right now is the result of problems that were ignored for far too long, until they finally became impossible to hide. Every Sunday followed the same painful pattern. The ball gets snapped, the pocket collapses almost instantly, the quarterback is forced off his spot not because the play design failed, but because bodies are already in his face. Receivers don't even get a chance to finish their routes. Timing gets thrown out the window, and by the end of the game, people are once again asking whether the quarterback is the problem, instead of asking why he's being put in an impossible situation over and over again. That's how seasons quietly die, not with one catastrophic moment, but with constant chaos that makes growth impossible. You can't evaluate an offense when everything is rushed. You can't expect confidence when every play feels like damage control. And you absolutely can't talk about development when survival becomes the main objective. At some point, it stops being about missed reads or bad decisions and starts being about basic functionality. And Cleveland hasn't had that. What makes this even worse is that everyone saw it coming. The warning signs were there early. Protection issues that never got cleaned up. Injuries that exposed a lack of depth. Veterans who couldn't hold up anymore but kept getting trotted out anyway. Instead of fixing it decisively, the team kept patching holes and hoping things would stabilize. They didn't. They spiraled. And eventually, the pressure reached a level where doing nothing was no longer an option. Because when your offense looks broken at its foundation, it forces the entire organization to confront a harsh reality. This isn't about tweaking play calls or riding things out until next year. This is about recognizing that the current path leads nowhere, and once that realization sets in, everything changes. The moment the news dropped, the conversation around this team shifted almost instantly. No press conference, no dramatic announcement, just a transaction that on the surface felt routine. But inside league circles and among fans paying close attention, it landed very differently. The Cleveland Browns reached outside their own building and pulled an offensive lineman directly from another organization's practice squad. and the timing of it is what made people stop and look twice. Teams don't usually make moves like this at the very end of a lost season, unless something inside the building has snapped. This wasn't about salvaging a meaningless game. It wasn't about depth for the sake of depth. It was a response, a reaction to weeks of frustration boiling over into something the front office could no longer justify or spin away. When decisions like this happen now, instead of waiting for the offseason, it tells you the evaluation phase has already begun. What really changed the tone was how fast it happened. There was no "we'll look at it internally" period, no public patience, no loyalty speech about trusting the guys already in the room. Instead, Cleveland immediately went shopping for help, signaling that tolerance for the current level of play had officially expired. That alone made this move louder than any quote could. And it's important to be clear, this wasn't about one bad snap or one ugly drive. This was about a pattern that reached a breaking point, the kind of performance that forces front offices to admit hard truths earlier than they planned. Bringing in new blood right now sends a message not just to fans, but to the locker room. Jobs are being evaluated, roles are no longer guaranteed, and comfort is gone. But the most interesting part, this move wasn't just reactive, it was directional. It hinted at how Cleveland may be planning to rebuild this unit moving forward. Young, hungry, coachable, not names built on past reputation, but players still trying to prove they belong. And once you understand who they brought in and where he came from, it becomes clear this was never a random decision. It was the first domino. At first glance, his name doesn't jump off the screen. No headline buzz, no draft night hype. But that's exactly why this move matters. Kingsley Iwokun isn't being brought in to sell jerseys or generate excitement on social media. He's being brought in because Cleveland is looking for answers in places they haven't bothered to search before.
Iwokun entered the league without the safety net of being drafted. Coming out of a major program, he still had to grind for every opportunity, fighting through training camps and practice squad reps just to stay in the conversation. That kind of path doesn't create entitlement, it creates urgency. Players like that know they're always one mistake from being replaced, and that pressure tends to sharpen focus instead of dull it. What really stands out is where he developed. Before Cleveland came calling, Iwokun spent his time inside one of the most physically dominant offensive line systems in football with the Detroit Lions. That matters more than people realize. Detroit didn't just stash him away and forget about him. They trusted him enough to put him on the field in real games, even giving him starting reps at center. That tells you this wasn't a desperation body, it was a developmental piece viewed as capable of executing within a serious system. Learning behind an offensive line that prides itself on communication, toughness, and discipline changes a player. You pick up habits, you learn how pros prepare. You see what real protection looks like when everyone does their job. Iwokun didn't just sit and watch, he was part of that environment, absorbing it daily. That experience carries value far beyond raw snaps. Cleveland clearly sees something in that background. They're not expecting him to walk in and magically fix everything overnight. This is about upside, about giving an opportunity to someone who still has something to prove and hasn't been beaten down by years of dysfunction. And with the way this offensive line is looked, sometimes hunger matters more than pedigree, because once players stop believing things can change, effort drops. Iwokun arrives without that baggage, and that alone makes his presence intriguing. For all the chaos surrounding this offensive line, there has always been one name that felt like stability when he was healthy. That's why the moment Wyatt Teller went down again, it hit differently. Not just because of the injury itself, but because of what it symbolized for where this unit and maybe this team is headed. Teller's season never felt smooth. He battled through a lingering calf issue that refused to fully heal, gutting out snaps when his body clearly wasn't right. And when that same injury flared up again, forcing Cleveland to place him on injured reserve, the decision felt less like a short-term move and more like a full stop, a line drawn under a chapter that might already be closing. What really made people pause, though, wasn't the transaction, it was the way Teller spoke afterward. There was hesitation, emotion, the kind you don't hear from players who fully expect to be back. He admitted he didn't know if that last game might be his final one in a Browns uniform. He didn't dramatize it, he didn't complain, he just spoke honestly about how much the moment meant to him and how uncertain everything suddenly felt. That moment mattered because Teller represents the last link to a version of this offensive line that actually worked, a player who made Pro Bowls, a player opponents had to account for. When he's on the field and healthy, the difference is obvious, but availability matters, and in the NFL, time catches everyone. Injuries don't ask for permission before they change careers.
If Teller's time in Cleveland really is winding down, it reinforces a hard truth the organization can no longer avoid. You can't keep leaning on the same pillars and hoping they hold forever. Eventually, rebuild becomes the only option. And that reality makes the timing of Cleveland's recent moves feel less coincidental and more intentional. Because once the old foundation starts cracking, the next era has to begin, whether you're ready or not. If Wyatt Teller's injury symbolized the slow fade of stability, the performance of Cam Robinson was the moment everything finally boiled over. There's no delicate way to put it. What unfolded on the field wasn't a minor slip or an off day. It was the kind of showing that forces organizations to confront uncomfortable decisions immediately. Assignments were missed, leverage was lost, pressure came fast and often, and the effect rippled through the entire offense. What made it worse was how visible the breakdown became. Pass rushers weren't winning on creative schemes or complex disguises. They were beating blocks clean. That's the kind of thing that destroys timing and confidence in a hurry. Every snap felt rushed, and every mistake magnified the next. You could feel the tension rising, not just from the stands, but on the field itself. The quarterback felt it. You could see it in the body language. Plays ended with quick escapes, hurried throws, or hits that never should have happened. And when protection becomes a question mark, nothing else works the way it's designed to. Routes don't develop, reads get cut in half, the entire offense shrinks. At that point, it stops being about individual execution and starts being about survival. Cleveland's response is what turned this from frustration into fallout. There was no attempt to defend the performance publicly, no talk of patience or internal fixes. Instead, the front office acted immediately, going outside the building to bring in help. That timing is everything. It tells you that what happened crossed a line, that the standard, whatever it's been, just changed. Moments like this are rarely isolated. They mark the end of tolerance and the beginning of evaluation. When a team reacts this fast, it's a sign that trust has eroded and roles are being reassessed in real time. And once that door opens, it doesn't just close again. It leads directly to bigger questions about who belongs, who doesn't, and how much longer the current structure can hold. Moves like this don't happen in a vacuum, especially this late in the season. When urgency suddenly appears where patience used to live, it usually means someone at the very top is paying close attention, and in Cleveland, that points directly to Jimmy Haslam. Ownership involvement has long been a sensitive topic here, but this situation feels different. This wasn't a ceremonial gesture or a PR-driven decision. This felt personal. Haslam has taken plenty of criticism over the years, much of it earned. Coaching turnover, questionable roster decisions, and a lack of continuity have kept this franchise stuck in neutral far too often. But what stands out now is timing. Instead of waiting for the offseason, instead of letting another lost season quietly end, action was taken immediately. That suggests frustration has finally turned into urgency. Owners don't typically intervene over one position group unless something has gone seriously wrong. This wasn't about optics, it was about protecting an investment. When a young quarterback is taking repeated hits, when development stalls because chaos is constant, alarm bells start ringing in executive offices. And once those alarms go off, waiting becomes a risk no one wants to own. This also signals something else: accountability. The front office, the coaching staff, the locker room, everyone feels it when ownership steps closer to the decision-making process. Silence turns into evaluation, comfort turns into pressure, and suddenly assumptions about next year don't feel so safe anymore. What makes this moment so important is what it could lead to next, because when ownership decides the status quo is unacceptable, the ripple effects rarely stop with one signing. bigger conversations tend to follow, about leadership, about direction, about whether the people in place are capable of fixing what's clearly broken, and that sets the stage for the most uncertain part of all. Once ownership pressure starts creeping into the building, the spotlight doesn't stay on the roster for long. It inevitably shifts toward leadership, and right now the silence surrounding Kevin Stefanski is louder than anything he could say. Questions about his future have been asked repeatedly, and the answers, or lack thereof, have only fueled the uncertainty. Carefully worded responses, quick deflections, nothing that sounds like job security. What made things more interesting was how everyone else responded. Players were asked about the situation too, and to their credit, they avoided the trap entirely. No endorsements, no reassurances, no pushing back on the narrative. That kind of neutrality is understandable, but it also speaks volumes. When even the locker room doesn't want to touch the subject, it tells you the situation is far from settled. Behind the scenes, the speculation has only grown louder. Reports have started circulating that Cleveland could explore other options if a change is made. One name that keeps surfacing is Mike McDaniel. To be clear, this remains unverified talk, the kind that often pops up when a team is desperate for direction. But the reason it's gaining traction is obvious. McDaniel is viewed as a quarterback-focused coach, someone who builds systems around protection, rhythm, and timing, exactly what Cleveland has lacked. There's also been quiet buzz around Jim Schwartz, which raised eyebrows when he didn't immediately shut down questions about a potential head coaching role. That hesitation mattered. Schwartz has earned respect for keeping the defense competitive despite all the chaos on the other side of the ball, and some believe stability might start there. Again, nothing confirmed, but the door wasn't slammed shut either. Rumors don't appear out of nowhere. They grow when leadership feels vulnerable and the path forward feels unclear. Whether these names are realistic or not, the fact that they're being discussed at all says everything about where Cleveland stands. Coaching stability is no longer assumed, and when that question hangs unanswered, it casts a shadow over every other move the team makes. While Cleveland has been stuck searching for answers, the comparison that Browns fans hate the most keeps resurfacing, and this time it came straight from the voice of someone living. The opposite reality. Joe Burrow was asked about sacks, pressure, and records tied to how often quarterbacks get taken down. His response was calm, almost casual. He wasn't worried about numbers. He wasn't changing how he played. He trusted that things would work the way they were supposed to. That confidence doesn't come from toughness alone. It comes from structure, from knowing that when the ball is snapped, there's a real chance the pocket will actually exist. Burrow plays behind an organization that, despite its own flaws, made a clear decision to prioritize protection. They invested resources, they adjusted when things didn't work, and they built a foundation that allows their quarterback to focus on winning instead of bracing for impact. That contrast is impossible to ignore. While one quarterback is being asked about historical sack records in a calm, theoretical way, another is spending every week navigating chaos. The difference isn't talent, it isn't work ethic, it's philosophy. One team treats offensive line play as optional until proven otherwise. The other treats it as non-negotiable. What makes the comparison sting even more is how avoidable it all feels. There's a blueprint sitting right in the same division. Protect the quarterback, give him time, let the offense grow naturally. It's not complicated, but it does require commitment, and until Cleveland fully buys into that idea, these comparisons will keep happening, no matter how uncomfortable they are. Because at the end of the day, elite quarterbacks don't just survive pressure, they thrive when they're allowed to. And right now, that gap says more about the teams around them than the players themselves. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, this was never really about one practice squad signing or one bad performance up front. It's about what that decision represents. Bringing in new blood at this point in the season is an admission, an acknowledgement that what Cleveland has been doing simply hasn't worked. The problems run too deep to ignore, and the cost of continuing down the same path is far too high. The real stakes revolve around the future of the quarterback position, and by extension, the future of the franchise itself. History has been ruthless to teams that fail to protect their young passers.
Talented careers have been shortened, confidence shattered, and potential wasted because organizations waited too long to fix what was broken. Cleveland doesn't get endless chances. Every season spent ignoring the offensive line chips away at something that might not be recoverable. This moment feels like a fork in the road. One direction leads to real change, an aggressive rebuild of the trenches, smarter investment, and a commitment to doing things the hard but correct way. The other leads right back to the cycle fans know all too well. New faces, new excuses, same results. Small moves can become meaningful if they're part of something larger, but if they're treated as symbolic gestures instead of the start of a full overhaul, nothing really changes. What makes this offseason different is urgency. There's no hiding behind patience anymore. Ownership sees it, fans feel it, the league knows it. Cleveland can either learn from the mistakes that have buried promising teams before them, or it can become another cautionary tale. Fix the foundation, and everything else has a chance to fall into place. Ignore it, and no coaching hire, no scheme, and no talent on the outside will ever be enough.